It was late in the afternoon, and I was hiking alone in the woods. The sun was sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows over the trail. I'd been walking for hours, but I wasn't really lost. I knew the area well. Still, the woods felt different today, quieter, like the air was heavier than usual. Every step seemed to echo, and there was no sound of birds or insects. Stopped for a moment to rest, leaning against a tree. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, movement. My heart skipped a beat as I turned my head toward the clearing up ahead. A deer, its coat a rich brown, stepped cautiously into view. It looked peaceful, but something about the way it moved felt off. It didn't seem aware of me, or maybe it was too calm, too still. It didn't seem to notice the shift in the air, the creeping tension that I felt growing around me. Stayed perfectly still, not wanting to disturb it, but then I heard it. The sound of something heavy crashing through the underbrush. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the deer. The leaves and branches snapped loudly, and my stomach dropped. I knew that sound. I looked back to where the deer stood, and my heart nearly stopped. It was gone, and then I saw it. The tiger. Its orange and black stripes barely visible through the trees, but unmistakable. Its eyes were locked onto me. It didn't make a sound. It was massive, its muscles rippling under its fur, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I froze. I knew there was no way I could outrun it. My legs felt weak, and panic surged through me like a cold wave. The tiger was circling, moving silently through the brush, closer and closer, but it wasn't charging. It was studying me, waiting. I took a few steps backward, but that only made it move faster. The tiger moved with a grace that was terrifying. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I'd heard stories about these animals. Predators like this didn't hunt unless they were hungry or threatened. Suddenly, the deer reappeared, standing between me and the tiger. It was still calm, almost unnervingly so, but its eyes were focused on the tiger. The tiger paused. I saw its muscles tense, but it didn't move closer. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I had to move. Slowly, I backed away from the scene, my eyes locked on the tiger, watching for any sign of a strike. The deer stood there, like a barrier between us, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude for the creature. When I reached the edge of the woods, I turned around one last time. The tiger had disappeared back into the trees, and the deer was nowhere to be seen. The air felt lighter, the world less heavy, like the forest had finally exhaled. I made my way back to the trailhead, my heart still pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what had just happened. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the deer had somehow saved me, even if I'd never understand why. The woods, once again, felt quiet, but this time it was peaceful. The tiger had gone, and I was alive, had no explanation for it, but I was certain of one thing. I wouldn't be hiking alone again anytime soon. It was early morning when I set out for a hike through the dense forest, the kind of quiet morning where you can hear the leaves rustle and feel the crisp air on your face. I loved these hikes, the solitude, the sense of peace away from the world. But today, something felt different. The air was heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the trail ahead, but every now and then, I'd hear a snap of a twig or a rustling in the bushes. It wasn't the usual sound of squirrels or birds. This was something bigger, something that seemed to move with purpose. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, but nothing was there. Still, the hairs on my neck stood up. I continued on, the trail narrowing as the trees grew thicker around me. Suddenly, I froze. Through the gaps in the trees, I saw something moving, something large and sleek. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I blinked, the shape became clearer. A tiger. I stood perfectly still, my breath caught in my chest. The tiger was only a few yards away, hidden in the tall grass, its eyes locked onto me. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I knew that if I moved too quickly, I'd become prey. The tiger's gaze never left me. It was sizing me up, waiting for a sign of weakness. In the stillness, a rustle came from the other side, an unexpected noise, but it was enough to draw the tiger's attention. The rustle came closer, and then, through the trees, I saw another shape, a deer. A large doe, moving cautiously, unaware of the predator nearby. The tiger shifted its stance, its body low to the ground, preparing to pounce. My pulse raced, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The deer was getting closer, and I knew the tiger would strike any moment. I wanted to scream, to warn the deer, but I was frozen. My mind screamed that I should move, get away from this place, but my legs refused to listen, and one swift movement, the tiger sprang. The deer bolted, its hooves pounding the earth, but the tiger was faster. It was all a blur, a flash of fur and muscle as the predator closed in on its prey. There was no hesitation, no mercy, just a savage instinct to survive. The sound of the deer's frantic struggle filled the air, followed by a sickening silence. Stood there, watching the tiger drag the deer away into the thicket. My heart was still racing, but not from fear anymore. It was a mix of disbelief and relief. The tiger had been so close to me, and yet, it had chosen the deer. In a strange way, I felt lucky. I took a slow step backward, careful not to make a sound. The tiger was still in the underbrush, its meal satisfying its hunger. I knew I had to leave before it turned its attention back to me, but I couldn't help but look one last time. The forest had returned to its eerie calm, the predator and prey a reminder of nature's harshness. I turned around and headed back down the trail, each step a bit faster than the last. The forest didn't feel peaceful anymore, it felt alive, watching, waiting. As I reached the edge of the woods and saw the sun breaking through the trees, I realized how close I had come to being the tiger's next meal. I kept walking, my pace quickening as I neared the safety of the road. That day, I learned that nature is not always as beautiful as it seems. Sometimes, it's terrifying, and there's no room for anyone but the strongest. When I finally reached my car, I took a deep breath, thankful to be alive. But I knew I wouldn't forget that tiger. Not for a long time. The night in the woods, it was supposed to be a peaceful hike, just me and my dog, Max. We had been out in the woods for hours, the path narrowing as the sun started dipping behind the trees. I should have turned back when the light began to fade, but I figured we'd be fine. After all, I'd done this trail before. Max was ahead, sniffing at the ground, his tail wagging. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air and pushed forward, ignoring the growing sense that something was off. The woods were quieter than usual. No birds, no rustling animals, just the sound of Max's paws on the dirt path and my own steady breathing. Then, I heard it. A faint rustling from the bushes, too soft to be a breeze. My stomach tightened. Max stopped, his ears perked. He didn't bark, which was unusual. He usually barked at any noise, even a squirrel. I stood still, listening. The noise came again, closer this time. I scanned the trees, trying to see through the thick underbrush. Nothing. I chalked it up to nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Max was getting restless now, looking around and pulling on the leash. I held him back, trying to stay calm. And then, out of nowhere, a loud snap of a twig from behind us. My heart skipped a beat. I turned, expecting to see another hiker or maybe a curious deer. Instead, I saw nothing. Just the fading light of the forest. My gut told me it wasn't a deer, though. I slowly began walking again, my pace quickening as I looked around. The rustling noise was back, but this time it was louder, closer. Max started pulling harder, whimpering. He'd never acted like this before. A chill ran down my spine as I turned a corner in the path and froze. There, at the edge of a clearing, was a pair of glowing eyes. Big, amber eyes that stared back at me from the underbrush. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. They were too big to be a deer, and something about them made me feel small, like I was nothing but prey. Max growled softly, but I didn't pull him away. I was paralyzed with fear. Then, slowly, the shape emerged from the shadows. A tiger. Its massive body moved silently through the underbrush, muscles rippling under its thick fur. It wasn't a mirage. It wasn't a mistake. It was a real, live tiger. I backed up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. The tiger's eyes followed me with unnerving focus. Max barked, sharp, frantic. It was a mistake. I knew at the moment the sound left his mouth. The tiger's head snapped toward us, and in one swift motion, it pounced. I didn't think. I grabbed Max's leash, pulling him away with all my strength, barely managing to dodge as the tiger's claws slashed through the air where I had been standing. It was a blur of motion. My heart was racing. I could hear the tiger's growls, feel the ground shake as it stalked closer. I ran. My legs were heavy with fear, but I didn't dare stop. I tugged on Max, who was struggling to keep up, but I knew I had to get out of there. The tiger was right behind us, its growl deep and guttural. I turned a corner, hoping the dense trees would slow it down, but I knew it was still there, its eyes never leaving us. Then, by some miracle, I saw a break in the trees. It was early morning when I found myself alone in the woods. The air was thick with mist, and the ground was soft with dew. I had planned for a peaceful walk to clear my mind, but something felt off. It wasn't the kind of quiet I was used to. This was a heavy, unsettling silence. The birds had stopped chirping, and there was no sound of the wind through the trees. I kept walking, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows through the thick forest. As I pushed forward, my boots sinking slightly in the moist earth, I heard a faint rustle in the underbrush. I froze, every muscle tense. The sound was too deliberate to be a squirrel or a bird. I slowly turned my head, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. A few steps later, I heard it again. Closer this time. My heart began to race. I tried to shake the fear, telling myself it was just a deer or something harmless, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The rustling stopped, replaced by an eerie, still silence. And then I saw it. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of movement. It was quick, too fast to make out at first, but then I saw its eyes. A flash of yellow, and they were locked on mine. I froze, too terrified to move, my legs shaking beneath me. It was a tiger. Its body was low, creeping silently through the underbrush, its muscles rippling with every movement. I couldn't believe it. I had read about tigers roaming the edges of human settlements in places far away, but this was happening right in front of me. The tiger stared at me for what felt like forever, its eyes never leaving mine. I could see the sharpness of its teeth, the power in its legs. It was waiting, like a predator calculating its next move. I could hear my own breath now, shallow and panicked. I slowly backed away, trying to make no sudden moves. The last thing I wanted was to provoke it. I moved slowly, step by step, never breaking eye contact. The tiger didn't move at first, but its body was tensed, ready to spring. My mind was racing. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't fight it. I had no choice but to hope that somehow I would make it out of this. Then, just as I was about to turn and run, I heard a sharp snort from behind me. My heart stopped. Another noise. This time, it wasn't from the tiger, it was something else. I turned, my body trembling with fear. It was a deer, a large buck, and it was standing there, staring at me with wide, fearful eyes. I had no time to process what was happening. The tiger shifted, its attention now split between me and the deer. For a moment, everything was still again, both animals locked in a silent standoff. The buck seemed to sense the danger, its muscles coiling like it was ready to bolt. But the tiger didn't move. It didn't lunge, it didn't chase. Instead, it watched the deer, calculating. I took a slow breath, barely able to believe what I was seeing. And then, without warning, the tiger turned its gaze back to me. I didn't even think. I turned and sprinted, faster than I ever thought I could. I didn't hear the tiger behind me, but I didn't dare stop to look. I just ran, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind focused solely on the path ahead. I didn't stop until I broke through the trees and stumbled into an open field. I didn't hear the tiger anymore. The deer was long gone. I was panting, exhausted, and my body was trembling from the adrenaline. But I had made it out. I stood there, catching my breath, and for the first time, I realized that nature is unpredictable. It doesn't care about what we plan or expect. It was a reminder that we're just another part of this wild world, subject to its rules. And sometimes, we're lucky enough to walk away from it. It was late afternoon when I decided to go for a walk in the woods behind my house. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. I always enjoyed these walks, but today, something felt off. The air was heavy, like something was watching me. I shrugged it off, trying to tell myself I was being paranoid. I took the usual path, weaving through the thick brush. The sound of my footsteps crunching on the dry leaves was the only thing I could hear, until I noticed the silence. It wasn't the normal forest quiet, there was a stillness that made my skin crawl. No birds, no rustling in the trees. I stopped, looking around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I continued on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, the same trees that had always made me feel safe. But not today. The path started to narrow, and as I rounded a bend, I froze. There, standing a few yards ahead, was a deer. It was staring right at me, its big, dark eyes unblinking. It didn't move, not even a twitch. I thought it was odd, but figured it was just a curious animal. I stood still, watching it, until a sound from behind me made me whip around. My heart pounded. The rustling came from the dense underbrush. I couldn't see anything, but the sound was unmistakable, heavy, steady, like something large was moving through the woods. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to look. But my instincts screamed at me to run. I didn't know what was back there, but I knew it wasn't good. The deer, still frozen, suddenly turned its head and darted off, vanishing into the trees. I took a step backward, my breath quickening. That's when I heard it, deep, slow breathing, the kind of breathing that didn't belong in the woods. It was too heavy, too deliberate. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. My legs moved faster than I thought possible, crashing through branches, my foot slipping on the wet ground. I didn't care. I just had to get out of there. As I sprinted, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. A flash of orange. The tiger. Its muscles rippled as it prowled behind me, too fast, too strong. I could feel its eyes on me, its presence getting closer. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. The path widened up ahead. I could see the end of the woods, my house, just a few hundred yards away. But the tiger was faster, and it was closing in. I dared not look back, but I could hear it, its steps behind me, louder now, like it was right there. I pushed harder, but I stumbled, falling to the ground. My chest hit the dirt, and I thought for sure it was over. But I didn't hear the tiger's growl. Instead, there was a rustling sound. I glanced back, and there it was. The tiger was no longer chasing me. It had stopped at the edge of the trees, pacing back and forth. I didn't know why it stopped, but I didn't wait to figure it out. I scrambled to my feet and ran the last stretch toward my house. My heart hammered in my chest. When I finally made it to the door, I slammed it shut behind me, my hands trembling. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. I don't know why the tiger didn't attack. Maybe it lost interest, or maybe it saw something else in the woods that made it hesitate. But whatever it was, I was just happy to be alive that night. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying the moment when I thought it would be my last. The feeling of being hunted, of being nothing more than prey in the eyes of a predator. But the next day, when I went out to check the woods, the only thing I found were the prints of a large cat, not far from the path I had taken. The tiger was still out there, but for now, it seemed to be keeping its distance. I didn't take another walk in those woods for a long time. And maybe, just maybe, that was for the best. I had been hiking for hours, the quiet woods stretching out in every direction. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the trail. I knew I should turn back soon, but something about the solitude of the forest kept me moving forward. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves or a bird calling in the distance. Wasn't expecting anything unusual. After all, the woods here were well-traveled, and I had hiked these paths before. But today felt different. The usual peace of the place felt off, like something was just out of reach, waiting in the silence. Suddenly, I heard it, crunching leaves behind me. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a deer or something harmless. But the sound was too deliberate, too close. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows between the trees, then I saw it. A flash of orange and black. My breath caught in my throat. A tiger. It was huge, its muscles rippling under its sleek fur, eyes locked on me. Its movements were smooth, predatory. It didn't seem afraid, not in the least. I backed up, my body stiff with fear. I knew I couldn't outrun it. It was fast, strong, built for this forest. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything. Without warning, I heard another sound, lighter, quicker. A deer, bounding across the path in front of me. The tiger's head snapped to the side, its focus momentarily shifting from me to the deer. In that moment, I didn't hesitate. I sprinted to the side, diving into a thicket of brambles, hoping the tiger would be distracted long enough for me to hide. I crouched, breathing heavily, the sharp sting of thorns digging into my skin. I tried to make myself as small as possible, keeping my eyes locked on the clearing where I had seen the tiger. I could hear the deer's frantic hoofbeats, the tiger's growl echoing through the trees. I stayed motionless, praying it wouldn't come my way. Time seemed to stretch on for what felt like hours, but eventually, the sounds of the chase faded. The forest became quiet again, the only noise the wind whispering through the trees. I carefully stood, still listening for any movement. The tiger had gone, with every nerve in my bod. I was hiking through the dense forest, the kind of place where the trees grow so thick that the sun barely touches the ground. It was early afternoon, but the air felt cool, damp, and heavy. The only sound was my boots crunching on the dry leaves beneath me. I'd been walking for hours, and I wasn't sure if I was on a trail anymore. But I didn't mind. I liked being alone in nature, the quiet helping me clear my head. Was starting to feel the weight of the day on my shoulders when I noticed something strange. A movement in the bushes ahead. I stopped, my heart skipping a beat. There was nothing at first, just the rustling of leaves. But then I saw it. A flash of orange, just for a second. A tiger. My body froze. I didn't know what to do. I knew tigers lived in this part of the world, but I had never expected to see one, especially not this close. My instincts told me to stay as still as possible, so I did. Every muscle in my body locked up, and my breathing slowed. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The tiger moved cautiously, stalking through the brush, its amber eyes locked on me. It was so quiet, like it was testing the air. I could see the strength in its body, the muscles rippling under its thick coat. It wasn't just a predator, it was a force of nature, and in that moment, I felt incredibly small. Suddenly, I heard something else. A rustle from behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned, expecting another predator, but instead, I saw a deer. It was standing a few feet away, looking at me with wide eyes. I froze, unsure what to do. The deer's gaze seemed almost pleading. It didn't move, but the tension in the air was unbearable. I could feel the tiger's presence behind me, like it was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, the deer bolted. It leapt forward, its hooves thundering against the ground. The tiger, quick as lightning, pounced. It was a blur of muscle and claws, and before I could even comprehend what was happening, the deer was down, the tiger's jaws sinking deep into its neck, stood there, unable to move, as the tiger finished its kill. The sound of the deer's struggle echoed in my ears, followed by an eerie silence. The tiger slowly looked up from its prey, its eyes meeting mine again. For a second, I thought it might charge at me next, but instead, it simply backed away. The predator knew when it had what it needed, stood motionless, not sure whether to breathe or run. But the tiger didn't seem interested in me anymore. It turned, disappearing into the brush as silently as it had appeared. I didn't know if I should feel relieved or terrified. In the end, it didn't matter. The danger had passed. I waited a few moments longer, just to be sure. Then, without a sound, I turned around and slowly walked back in the direction I'd come from, my legs shaky beneath me. The forest, once so peaceful, now felt alive with unseen eyes watching every step I took. But I kept walking, step after step, until I finally saw the clearing where I'd parked my car. I reached the edge of the woods. I took a deep breath, the weight lifting from my chest. I had made it out alive. The tiger had been a reminder of how small we are in this world, how quickly things can turn. But I had learned something, too: never take the wilderness for granted. The animals that live there don't care who you are. You're just another part of their world. I got in my car and drove away, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. That forest was behind me now, but I knew it would stay with me forever. The memory of the tiger's eyes would never leave. I would never forget the day I was reminded how fragile life really is. I was out in the woods, miles from civilization. I had been hiking for hours, following a trail that seemed to wind endlessly through dense trees and thick underbrush. The sun was low, casting long shadows, but the temperature was still warm. I wasn't exactly lost, but I could tell the path was getting less clear. The only sounds around me were the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call, and I thought nothing of it at first. Then, something changed. I heard a rustle behind me. It wasn't just the wind or an animal small enough to be unnoticed. This was heavier, deliberate, like something large was moving through the brush. I froze, trying not to breathe too loudly. My instincts told me something was wrong, but I couldn't place what. Slowly, I turned, my eyes scanning the trees. There was nothing. Just the endless expanse of green and brown. I turned back and kept walking, but that feeling didn't leave me. Every snap of a twig, every shift of the air felt like it was drawing closer. I began to move faster, my heart thumping in my chest. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe it was nothing. But that thought didn't settle my nerves. Out of nowhere, I heard it, a low, guttural growl. My blood went cold. I turned again, this time slower, careful. And there it was, just a blur of motion at first, but then it came into focus. A tiger. Its eyes locked with mine, and my body froze in terror. I knew I had to get out of there. But where? The trail was a narrow path, surrounded by thick trees. There was no cover, no way to outrun it. The tiger stepped forward, low to the ground, its muscles tensing for what looked like a leap. I backed up, trying to move silently. My breath was shallow, my mind racing. I had read about this. You don't turn and run. But what choice did I have? The tiger stalked closer, eyes never leaving mine. My legs felt like lead, but somehow, I found the strength to start running. Every step felt like it was too slow, too loud. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, the weight of every branch on the forest floor turning into a trap. Heard the growl again, closer this time. My heart hammered in my chest as I pushed harder, faster. I couldn't keep it up much longer. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw it, an open area ahead, a clearing. I didn't hesitate. I bolted for it, knowing that if I could just get to the open space, I might stand a chance. But as I reached the clearing, something even stranger happened. I saw a deer, staring right at me. It was calm, its eyes gentle, as if it didn't even notice the danger I was running from. The tiger was still behind me, its growl echoing through the trees, but the deer didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, like it was expecting me. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. But something in the air had shifted. The tiger's growl faded, its presence disappearing like a shadow at dawn. I glanced over my shoulder once more, half expecting to see it charging toward me, but there was nothing. The tiger was gone. I kept running until I found the edge of the woods, breathless and terrified. My legs were sore, my heart still racing, but I knew I was safe now. I had escaped. The deer was still in the clearing, watching me. It didn't move as I walked past it, but I could swear it nodded, as if understanding the fear I had just faced. There was no time to think about that, though. I kept moving, finally reaching the road where a car came into view. I was shaken, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. I had made it. But that moment with the deer stayed with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, it had been part of the reason I was alive. Maybe it had kept the tiger away. Maybe it hadn't, but I didn't care. I was safe now, and that was all that mattered. As I sat in the back of the car, I finally felt my breath slow, the danger behind me. The world had gone back to its quiet, peaceful rhythm. But the memory of those eyes, the tiger's, and the calm of the deer would stay with me forever. It was a regular morning when I decided to go for a hike in the woods. The sun had just started to rise, casting a pale orange light through the trees. I had been on these trails a dozen times before, so I wasn't worried about anything. The birds were singing, the air was cool and fresh, and everything felt peaceful. But something felt off today. I couldn't quite place it, but the silence in the woods was deeper than usual. As I walked, I heard a rustle behind me, a sound too deliberate to be caused by wind. I turned around quickly, but saw nothing. Maybe a squirrel or a bird, I thought. I kept walking, my heart picking up speed for no reason. Then, a few minutes later, I heard it again, closer this time. It was a low, soft sound, like something heavy brushing through the brush. I stopped, holding my breath. The air was too still now. I decided to keep moving, my pace quickening. But then, I heard it. A sharp crack of a twig snapping under something heavy. And then, the unmistakable sound of paws, too large for a normal animal, moving through the woods behind me. My pulse shot up. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a deer or something. But the footsteps didn't sound like a deer. They sounded like they were following me. I turned a corner in the trail, and there it was, just ahead. A deer. But it wasn't moving. It was standing still, staring directly at me. The look in its eyes was strange, almost unnatural. I didn't want to get too close, but curiosity kept me moving toward it. I was about to take another step when I heard it. A growl. Deep and rumbling. I froze. My blood ran cold as I slowly turned my head to the right. And there it was, a massive tiger, its eyes fixed on me. It had been following me, using the deer as cover. The tiger's muscles rippled under its orange coat as it took a few slow steps closer, its jaws slightly open, revealing sharp teeth. The deer took off in a panic, bounding into the woods, but the tiger didn't chase. It didn't need to. It was focused on me now. I could feel my legs go weak, but somehow I forced myself to take a step back. The tiger didn't move right away. It was studying me, its golden eyes watching every tiny shift I made. I had heard stories about how wild,